Hey everybody, welcome back. This is words number 33, which means Dani and I have achieved the Freemasonry of chatter. Dani, what do you think?
What does that mean?
Nothing. I'm just making it up. But I was thinking before I sent you the link, I was like, what number is this? I thought it was 32, but I was like, oh, it's 33. I'm sure that somebody will have somebody who thinks that we're shills for Israel will have something to say also about the fact that we are encoding our work with the number 33. And so we must be Freemasons.
Did Jesus die at 33? Is this our messiahhood?
I don't know. Was he part of the 27 Club?
No, I think 27 Club are only rock stars, but I think messiahs make it to 33. It was like John Belushi, Janis Joplin, and Jimi Hendrix were the 27s.
Right. So, it might be the Jesus thing, but I know that according to lore here, right? Like the 33rd degree of Freemasonry is when you're like into the inner circle, which is then like when you start getting the real information. It's kind of like when you get to a certain point in the Scientology and then you get to find out about what Zeno is, or I don't know, whatever the fuck, right?
Awesome. Okay, now it's going to start getting real. Everything's been prepped.
Everything's in prep, right? So, but I think Freemasonry is about like, proficiency at constructing created worlds, right? Really, it isn't. It started out with like, back when Freemasons were a thing, it was really about like working with stone and building things and whatnot. And I guess, the idea was like, if you were a Mason, you could be free because you knew how to build stuff or whatever. I think from what I understand about some of the starting points of it, again, I don't know. Right? But I don't think either one of us have any gift with stoneworking or erecting structures.
Don't limit me! How dare you! I don't know dick about stones.
Or erecting structures, but right, if one could produce enough chatter with words to like hold up a reality, it would be the two of us, right? So
on top of that,
right? And before we go, this episode is being brought to you by Sadie and her appearance on Dani's lovely shirts. There has been
they can't see me doing my cute little shirt dance.
Oh, Sadie's not on that one either. Okay.
No, this was my Standing Rock version.
Okay.
We could call this thing. We could call the buffalo Sadie.
But that's not Sadie. Like Sadie is Sadie. So for those, some people have been asking about how they can get Dani's shirts, and you can just get Dani's shirts at danicats.com. You can go there and it links you up with all of her stuff related to Words Are Matter and language coaching and all that kind of stuff. But Sadie is the little girl that's in all of Dani's cartoons. It's the way is it the way you see yourself?
I'm not at liberty to say.
Okay. But, I did notice, though, that I haven't been there since, so I can't take a picture. I was curious if you did the graffiti on the side of Erewhon in Venice, because if not, it looks like somebody saw your book there, because I know they used to sell your book there, right? Oh, that maybe somebody saw your book and copied your shit on the wall, that you owe some royalties, or at least a free juice that they tried to steal from you with overcharging you for something in it instead of something else. I remember that. So there you go, right? So Dani's shirts and her cartoons are very famous. I was happy to be the star of the quote cartoon a few weeks ago. And yes, you can get Dani's shirts at danicats.com. So
thanks for the commercial. Thanks for the
you're welcome. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with, and this is how being able to create Freemasonry of chatter would only happen amongst two obnoxious Jewish girls. Let's get right to the elephant that they claim we're not saying is in the room, or whatever. So you sent me a text. So explain your situation. Explain what you're.
Okay. So our last show, we were talking about the Adam Curry thing, and someone posted, people posted a bunch of things. Oh, also, I want to say that people in our audience have been posting fantastic comments on the videos, our chats on my channels, and the new way that YouTube is fucking with me is they're not showing any of them. So I just want our audience to know that that's not me. I'm not erasing the comments. I'm not withholding them. I welcome them. YouTube is not putting them up.
So you're saying that people are leaving you nice comments. And
great comments, and there was someone who was like kind of challenging me on Alex Jones and Trump, and she had really good perspective and a really cool link, because I get email notices when I get comments,
right?
But YouTube's holding all of them, and they're not even waiting for my approval, they're just not there.
So okay, so that's interesting, because there's somebody that I follow her on YouTube, not because I don't listen to her videos anymore. I listened to a few many years ago, but I follow this person on YouTube because, let's just say, she has a background similar to ours, some that are more similar to mine. She's spoken about a few things in the way that I've never heard, that I know things to be, but I've never heard anyone else talk about, and some of them I haven't even talked about publicly. So I understand for sure that that she can't be making this up if she doesn't have some kind of awareness of this, unless she's working for them and is there to try and agitate something in me it's not working or whatever. But one of the things that she's been doing lately, I don't listen to her videos, but I kind of follow. So a lot of times I just look at the videos that come up on my feed, and by the titles, I just vibe into them, and I don't even have to watch them. I can just intuit what they're about. But she's been talking about the same thing. She's like basically saying that she's being YouTube is attacking her by doing what you just said. And I was like, okay, she is like over the top with this shit now. But no, it's happening to you. But so that could be a thing happening to a lot of people, or she could be part of our cluster and it's something particular to whatever. I don't think that, but she seemed to think it was something special for her. There are connections there are some similarities between this person and between us. And so that's kind of interesting. The one thing I have noticed, and I've noticed this both on the Off Planet channel and on my personal channel, is a lot of times it'll say that there are 10 comments, but I only see 3. I don't see 10 comments, I see 3, right? And I don't generally check my notifications. I've started recently only because I did notice what you're talking about. One time, it wasn't I didn't think of it as, oh, it's a positive, lovely comment. It was just like a regular comment. It wasn't like negative or positive. It was like, maybe even just like, 3 fucking emojis in a row or something, right?
Okay, so while we're on the topic, because it's happened for the last 3 of our shows, and I called YouTube out on it on Twitter, and I was like, what the fuck? And they actually responded to me, and they were like,
everybody does at least once. Everybody responds to you at least one time. Nobody responds to me, but they all respond to you at least once.
Oh, we're going to have to circle back to that, because now I'm at radio silence with Adam, and I'm like, what is the pattern where we go to like several paragraphs of engagement and then it just goes to radio silence? Like, it's always the same. So yes, YouTube was responding to me and saying, well, maybe they're violating our community guidelines. And I sent them screenshots and I'm like, what community guidelines? Please tell me. And then of course, they dropped out of the conversation. But the through line is that they're always mentioning some sort of truth. It's not just like, you guys are awesome, you're my favorite podcasters on the planet, Emily's so pretty. It's not just stuff like that. It's like, hey, have you seen this? Or they're lying because of Benghazi or whatever. Like, there's a word or a link or a something that they want suppressed, and they're withholding all those comments.
That makes sense. I mean, I would say that, like, so obviously we've been witnessing lots of problems with YouTube for a long time right now, but to this day, my main issue with YouTube is the same thing that my first issue with YouTube was. And this was sometime in about 2012 or 2013. They removed the activity portion of their website. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
All right. So you know how now, like, you can choose between the feed that is your subscriptions, the feed that is your recommended, and the feed that is trending or explore. Mm-hmm. Well, there used to be a feed that was called activity. And what it did showed me in real time, that's just the way your subscriptions come in real time, like as people post them, they come, you could see the activity of all the people you were subscribed to. So I could see what you were watching. Like I could go on your channel and look at your history.
Oh, that's right. That is, so that's, I totally forgot about that.
That went away in 2012. There was 2 things that went away in 2012 time. That was one of them, okay? And I think there was a way too much learning going on, right? Because it's kind of like having access to your book collection. right? Like if you have a person you admire and suddenly you see their books, then you can see how they figured out the things that they it's way too much learning, and right. So once they figured it out, but that activity thing was there for a long time, and then it was just gone, right? They didn't like it was gone, and now every iteration is more and more stupid, right? Okay. The other thing that went away, and this is a technical issue. This isn't a content issue, but it to me is also a suppression of information on a certain level. Is you used to be able to click so your screen would go black and still be listening to the video without having to waste all your batteries. They took that away. I think that one went away in 2011. So two things now. You had to run your battery down low. You could only listen to so many videos a day. Whereas before I could literally listen to videos all day long without my phone dying because I would just be listening to the audio.
Okay, I think it also has something to do with surveillance and the phone's ability to surveil you and needing to be on to track you or something. I don't know. That just came to me intuitively. I don't really know.
I don't know, but whatever it is, it used to be that you could play it in the background. So you could have your screen off so you weren't running the display because that's where you burn most of your batteries. You couldn't do that anymore, right? So to me, that was really just, if you buy YouTube Red, you can have that still. So they wanted people to have to pay to not have their batteries run out. Like to me, that is like a stinky, underhanded move, right?
Those are all stinky and underhanded.
Right. Like, that was like, those two things for me those were the big problems, and everything else that happened after that, I'm not even really that mad about because I'm still mad about those two things. I'm still mad about the two main issues, right?
Totally.
So it did two things. It made you not able to listen to it without running your battery, but it also made you unable to listen to it with your phone in your pocket because when your butt touches the screen, it changes the video. It takes you to a different video and a different video and whatnot.
Well, does it also make it so that you can't navigate away? Because that's what bugs me about watching videos on my phone is that I have to have Safari open on the phone and that browser open. I can't go like to Google Maps or check a calendar or something, then the video shuts off. So did it used to have the capability to run in the background when we were doing other things on the phone?
No, I can't. I think that was, yes, I'd want to say maybe yes, but I can't say for sure because I wasn't necessarily trying to use it that way very often. So that wasn't my main annoyance with it. My main annoyance was I couldn't put it in my pocket anymore while I exercised because if my butt touches the screen, it changes the video. Right? So you couldn't listen without running your battery and you couldn't stick it in your pocket or something while you were exercising or whatever and still be listening, right? So, but what you're saying is annoying too, right? Kind of thing. So, yeah.
I just don't want our audience thinking that I'm taking the criticism away or hiding comments. Like I welcome everything and I just want you guys to know that I'm not, like it's not me. And it's also, and I know everyone's having this problem when I look at my like insights, there'll be like 250 views, but you go navigate onto my thing and it's like 12.
Yeah, no, I do. Like, yeah, I have the same kind of thing also.
We're all having that one.
Everyone's having that. But one of the things that I find fascinating that never fails to make it onto the comments are the ones where it's like the naked girls being like, love you with a timestamp and like a heart and a smiley emoji and a this and a that, right? It's like porn shit. Those always make it on.
Yeah, they have no problem with porn on any level on social media. It's just truth is the issue.
Yeah. So anywho, okay.
Okay, so what happened was that one of our beautiful, lovely audience members put the link to the video of the guy. It was an interview where the guy was breaking down Edward Snowden is a hologram.
Right.
Okay. And I was really into it and I was learning so much. And it was these different perspective on Alex Jones that were expanding my mind. And then at one point in the interview, the guy says, whoever was being, or, I don't remember, I think it was like a 3-person interview, says, well, Alex Jones married a Jew. And the Jewish media cabal is such a big thing. And that might have something to do with how he rose to the top or how popular he was. And that's when I texted you because I'm like, I don't get the fucking Jew cabal thing. And it was so stupid to me. Is every Jew in the Jew cabal? So he married a Jew, therefore that Jew is, I just don't, I'm not a Zionist, and I understand the issues with Israel and all of that, but as a person in media who grew up in Los Angeles around all Jews, I am not aware of the Jew media cabal. I am not aware of the benefits of being a Jew and just having shit thrown at us. So I don't understand this Jew. I don't get it.
Okay, so let me see if I can explain it to you. So in my assessment of Alex Jones, the only issue with him in reality related to anything having to do with Judaism is his refusal to ever be critical of Israel, right? That's a problem, right? That's a problem. And a lot of people who he's done business with over the years, who he's had as sponsors, they have a very pro-Israeli bent, right? And so while I wouldn't say he's explicitly pro-Israel vocally, his refusal to ever comment on or criticize the Israelis' actions toward Palestine or like, whatnot, that's the big issue with him, right? So
what's weird about that, and I just want to chime in, is that like, even if people don't have an issue with Israel's actions towards Palestine, is it not eyebrow raising that like people couldn't get grants after their homes were destroyed in Katrina
right.
if they were vocally opposing Israel? Like, why does no one notice that that's an issue?
Right. So right there, it should be enough evidence for someone that you're not part of the Jew cabal to the extent. So like, I think this is where it all gets really messy, right? It's a very, very valid point to bring up about both people in the regular media and in the alternative media, as well as other powerful positions when they are supposedly anti-war but not critical of Israel, right? When they are, talking about people getting discriminated against when they apply for home loan based on being black, but not talking about that they're getting discriminated based on being part of the BDS movement or whatever, right? So that's a problem. Then it jumps into this is like the Israel issue, right? Then there's like this other thing that is this Jew issue thing, right? And here's my space on this. And just if you're newly joining us or whatever, Dani and I are both Jewish. I'm half Jewish. Are you half Jewish or full Jewish?
I'm full blood.
You're full-blown Jew. All right, Dani is a full-blown Jew. I'm half Jewish. I have the unique position of being thought of by some people as being anti-Semitic or a Nazi, and others seem to think that I'm part of the Jew cabal. My feeling about it is if I am part of it, I haven't received any benefits yet. I didn't even have a bat mitzvah, so I didn't even get all that money. So I have had no benefits. The only benefit that I can say I have of being part of the Jew cabal, but I certainly don't see this as exclusive to the Jew cabal, is that I come from a family that likes to argue and debate a lot, and so my arguing and my debate skills and my ability to think quickly on my feet with critical reasoning or whatever is pretty sharp. I don't know if that's because I'm Jewish, but that's the only benefit I can think of that I have in any way had from coming from a Jewish family, is the level of arguing that went on, developed a lawyer, whether I have the degree or not.
Right.
So that's it. I can't think
that's just part of the culture. Like, that's just embedded.
Part of the culture. And also, I've tasted good bagels and matzo ball soup, right? Like, there's some
Western bagels. Western bagels are the best bagels in LA.
No.
Yes.
No. You're a bad Jew.
They bring their water in from New York to make them. What bagel could possibly compare to Western bagel in LA?
Oh my God, I will take you on a bagel tour of Los Angeles next time you come, and I will explain to you.
Have you had Western bagels?
I hate them. Yeah, I hate them. Certainly, it's me. Yeah. Okay, so right now you're seeing the benefits here of the Jew cabal. Is that like we're perfectly happy to debate the quality of bagels, and she'll think I'm insane, and I'll think she's insane, but we'll walk away being like, "I loved you because you're insane," right, or whatever.
I don't get the cabal piece.
Okay,
like there might be some people who are involved in the larger elite cabal who also happen to be Jewish, but it's weird to me when every Jew, including Alex Jones' wife and you and me, is all of a sudden part of it. I just don't get that.
Okay, so I think this is where this happens, and this is why we have to be really, really careful, right? Because truth can be used as a weapon in either direction. Okay. It is reasonable to point out that for the percentage of people that are alive in the world that are Jewish, Jews have a disproportionate amount of power and money. That's a fair thing to point out, right? That like the Jews make up a small population of the world, but there's a number of them in positions of power. You can point that out, but it isn't necessarily because they're Jewish that that's happening. My guess would be that there are Jews in power that got those positions unfairly because of family relations, which also exists with Italians, Irish, Protestants.
Nepotism is across culture.
Nepotism everywhere, right? So I think there's a percentage of it that's that. There's also the percentage of it that, like, according to all the IQ tests, the people with the generally highest IQ are Ashkenazi Jews, and the next is Asians, and so you see a disproportionate amount of Asians in certain kinds, right? So there is that thing that I think it's fair to point those things out, that has led to a situation where there's a disproportionate amount of power. But that doesn't then mean that just because someone is Jewish, that's no different than saying that, like, because somebody is white, they're innately a white supremacist, or that because somebody is black, they should be good at basketball, right? Like, it's the same thing, and I think people don't get that. Like, they think—
But it's a big part of the conspiracy culture. Like, the people in our conversation, there is this weird anti-Semitism, and because I'm such a contrarian, I've resisted calling it that. But when I heard it on this show about Alex Jones, I was like, I can't pretend that I'm not hearing this fucking ridiculousness. And I know there's the piece about the learned elders of Zion, right? And that document, but that document is a metaphor. And just because the characters in a story happen to be Jewish, I don't understand why people think it's logical to equate all Jews with this cabal. Like, is there something I'm missing? Is there really a Jewish cabal that's running this world that I'm not aware of? And why am I not in on it?
Okay, so I think, like, yes, to your point, like that, like, first of all, most people do not understand metaphor appropriately. They don't understand its significance or its importance or the nuance involved in using metaphor in a way that can sometimes lead to truth, and other times it's just a metaphor and nothing other. They don't understand the nuance. So I think it's kind of like, is a hard thing, right? Like, so one of the things, like, let me point out a situation, right? So there's an organization. It is a Jewish organization in Israel, right, that is pushing for, like, there to be open borders at European countries so that them, like the Syrian refugees and the Libyan refugees and the Somalis and stuff can go into all these European countries, right? But they don't want them in Israel. So they're providing services to help move people. I watched a documentary on it, like, back when the Syria thing was really big in, like, 2013, 14, 15. So, right, so Jewish people in Israel, and also probably, I can't say for sure, but from the way I understood it, Jews from other places in the world who contribute to this charity are contributing to this immigrants, and this is not a judgment on whether immigrants are good or bad, I'm stating the story of the documentary, pushing them into other European countries and into the West while not wanting them to be in Israel. Okay, that isn't okay. That's not okay, right? So, like they're basically wanting to control foreign policy for the rest of the world, and they're able to do so based on having money to make some of these things happen.
Well, right? I also think it's very important in what you're saying to differentiate, and for everyone on planet Earth to differentiate between Jews and Israelis. Well, they're not the same.
Well, so there's Israelis, there's Jews, there are Jewish Israelis, and there's, right. And then there's, so, like, when people are asking me, like, what kind of Jew, are you Ashkenazi? Are you Sephardic? Are you from Israel? Or whatever? The way I just say it, I'm like, no, I'm like a Brooklyn Jew, right? You know what I mean? Like a Brooklyn kind of Jew. But, so there is sometimes crossover, but there's plenty of people in Israel. There's people in Israel who aren't Jewish, and there's people in Israel who are anti-Israel, there are people who have served time in prison because they refused to join the IDF and do crappy things to Lebanon and Palestine and the other surrounding countries and whatnot, right? So not all Israelis are bad. In fact, some of them are very much on the side of the Syrians or the Palestinians or whatnot. There's a lot of people who live in Israel whose family come from those other places, and they're not pro-Israel, but they live in Israel to escape some of the issues of that. And they've had to, it's a very complex situation. And, you know, and I know lots of Jewish people who are BDS, who are anti-Israel, anti-Palestine, and also believe, but they're super progressive and left, so I disagree with them on. It's the Israel and Jewish issue is like a big messy. Jewish and Israeli are not the same thing. Most Jews that you know in your life are not Israeli, have never been to Israel, will never go to Israel, right? So there's a separation, and then there's this area where it does come together.
Well, and I also don't want to be forced to pretend that Israel was created out of this deep compassion for the Jewish people.
Not at all.
That's all like political, military, Middle East mishigas. So there's this like crazy conflation there. You know, that's like, if you're not a Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. No, that's not correct.
Yeah. So I think it's a lack of nuance, and the more appropriate thing would be to say, like, you know, if you feel like it's important to add that to the conversation, if the person wanted to be completely clear with the words, to say something like, because of his choice of topics to cover and some of his connections in terms of funding, it seems like Alex may be being funded by Israel or supported by Israel in some way, or pro-Israel. He happens to have a Jewish wife that may or may not have any connection to it, whatever. Now, his wife seems to have connection to the Bronfman family, which is right. Right, so it does start to get into some mess, but it does start to.
But like that's more valid to me. Like that would have been more valid in the interview of like, oh, she has these connections, not just she is
right.
Jewish. That's and like it's the most fucking racist shit that I hear. I'm not into it.
And it's sloppy because you're talking right now about a person who has the ability to be nuanced enough with their research and observation to recognize that Edward Snowden might be a hologram because you can see through the sidebar of his glasses. I think they were talking about in the show, if I remember correctly, that was like 7 years ago. So my memory is good. My memory is good, right?
You're on it, babe. That Jew brain is working for you.
If their observations can be that good, they should also be able to be that observant of these other things. So, you know, I don't like it either. And you know, I'm both. So I consider myself at this point to be anti-Israeli foreign policy, anti-Israeli power, anti any Jewish situation that gives them disproportionate power over my life in a way that I don't consent to. So I don't like okay, so I don't hate George Soros because he's Jewish, right? I dislike George Soros because he's a Nazi collaborator, right? And because
proud Nazi
collaborator who then plays the, oh, you're an anti-Semite if you think I'm a Nazi collaborator card. But my biggest thing is doesn't bother me that he's rich. Sure, if you can figure out how to play games with the stock market and do all this stuff. What I don't like is that this person who is gross and not elected by anybody has so much power over everyone's life. He's inserting things. Like, I don't care if he exists. I don't want to hear about him. I don't want to know what he's doing. I don't want anything he does or thinks or says or cares about to affect my ability to choose freely how I want to live my life. So are there some Jews who do that? Yes, but there's also some non-Jews who do that, right? To the best of my knowledge, the Koch brothers aren't Jewish, are they? I don't think they are.
I don't think so. No, they're not. They're like Christian, religious.
Well, I don't think Warren Buffett is Jewish. I don't think Bill Gates is Jewish, right? So I'm anti all of these.
Clintons aren't Jewish.
Who?
The Clintons.
Right. So that whole thing is just like, yeah, I agree with you. There is an underlying bigotry towards Jewish people. And I would also say an underlying bigotry towards anyone who isn't Christian in the alternative media. Less so now, right? Because you have people who formerly were like of the kind of left, more scooting into the alternative space based on health freedoms that are being taken away. So people who are anti-GMO, anti-vaccine, who otherwise wouldn't agree with us about anything else are now being clumped in. But basically, and this was my frustration for a long time, right? There aren't very many left-wing conspiracy theorists or Jewish conspiracy theorists. The alternative media, conspiracy theory, deep underground research has always largely been dominated by straight white Christian men.
Are there other Jewish
Republicans? There's a few. There's a few, but
Now I'm racking my brain. I'm like, wait a minute. Are there any? Who are they?
I mean, there's a few, but so there might be, like, so there's you, there's me. Michael Wan is half Jewish. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to think of anyone. Sally's friend, David Cole, I think is his name. Mm-hmm. But he's a conspiracy theorist of a sort, but other than that, he's totally mainstream on almost everything else. So there's a few. I'm sure there are some, but they're not at the top of the heap, right? There's not like, because it probably in some ways for the very reason that you're talking about, right? And there's also not very many left-wing conspiracy theorists. There are a few, and the ones that there are incredibly good. Some of the best conspiracy theorists, right? Like Dave McGowan, like Neil Sanders, they're left, like, they're left. But, I don't, I think this is if we're also tired of being, like, we have to be consistent. If we're tired of being called racists because we're white, we can't just say that somebody is obviously, like, getting unfair benefits from the world based on being Jewish. We can't, it has to go both ways, right? It has to go. So it was interesting that the same day that you texted me with that, or maybe like within the few days, I had a comment on one of my videos about how they stopped listening at the point where I just didn't press somebody harder on some issue with the Phoenicians being Jewish people or from Israel, that I just basically made a kind of a curt statement about it and then said it's complicated, which is exactly what I said. And it isn't because I don't think that there wasn't a point to what this guy was saying, but that's not what this show is about. I've already expressed my views on Israel and the disproportionate amount of power that some Jews have, plenty. And I've all, right? So, and yes, it is complicated in terms of the whole situation the situation is complicated. And he's like, and he didn't say anything about me being Jewish, but I said, and also just so you know, right? I'm also half Jew. I find myself in the position of being anti-Israel, mostly anti-Jewish power, and also half Jewish. So yeah, it's complicated. It's complicated. I'm not going to go through that every time, right? But I think it was, like he's literally, whatever else was said in the show, it was a controversial show. People can choose to, I don't even agree with all the things that were said in the show, right? So, but the purpose of the show was to dig out a few little nuggets and see where they connected. So that happened. And then I also noticed Michael was on Higher Side Chats that same week. His show came out, and somebody was just like attacking, it was an amazing show, attacking the shit out of Michael for like not acknowledging that a lot of these people that he was talking about were Jews or whatever. And I'm just like, that wasn't the point of what was happening, right? And it's not the point. And also at this point, we are far enough down the rabbit hole, and everybody should be, except for the people who are at level 1, should be well enough versed in this stuff that we understand that both Israel and in some cases wealthy, powerful Jewish people have a disproportionate amount of power. We shouldn't have to re-clarify that statement with every new topic that comes up. It's a known, right? And so it was just interesting. Like, I think this is one of the things that gets in people's way. And I talked about this in a show I just recorded with Michael. It's not out yet. Like, I've been doing this for a long time, but it's 100% clear to me now, and in ways that I hadn't seen it before, that we have got to abandon this tactic of labeling things bad or good, because it keeps us from being able to understand how they work, right? Like, Freemasons are bad, like occult stuff is bad, Jews are bad, right? Or they're good, or if you look at the occult stuff, you're bad or good, or if you choose to go and experiment with Freemasonry, you're bad. No, like we can't, even with symbols, if we're turned off to a symbol, like these fucking symbols, and you and I are going to go into this in our afterward section today, these symbols are sigils that they use for magic, they are portals, and if you are busy arguing about whether the sign is something a good person uses or a bad person uses, you're missing the fact that they're using portions of these symbols as basically shipping lanes in and out of realities. Like that, you're missing the point, right?
Totally. Well, and also, it just like, there's this inclination to put people in these stagnant boxes and to not acknowledge like the flow and the trajectory of an ever unfolding exploratory life. I came across some information, like I didn't know that Madame Blavatsky was involved in Satanism with Aleister Crowley. And I was like, oh shit, is Blavatsky not who I thought? And I was talking to my friend Neil about who we're gonna have on our show, because he's the Vax guy and he's also into a bunch of weird stuff. And he was like, you have to give people room to experiment and to dip their toe into something to figure out that they were into it. Like, I was in a thelemic mystery school, and it took me, you know, a couple weeks to realize, oh shit, this is horrible, you know, but like, we don't give people the space to experiment, to try things. Everything's so black and white and reductive these days.
And then what about this? So what you're saying, and then to take it a level deeper, maybe you recognize that something is not good, but that something that's not good is having a disproportionate effect on your reality. And in order to stop it, you need to understand how they're doing it. So the only way to understand it,
you have to go into it.
Go into it. Right now, you have to, if you could, you know, with the understanding not to get caught up in it, and some people do, and whatever, right? But you cannot figure something out without experimenting with it. You cannot just observe your way to freedom. And
well, I also think it gives you more legitimacy to have gone into it. Durek, who I'm working with again, who's this like shaman, whatever, he studied black magic to learn about it so that when he comes up against it, he knows what he's dealing with.
Yeah, no. So I think that like I actually think this is the biggest thing that's stunting the alternative research community. Now, not obviously there's some people who are doing this, but in terms of like why it's not advancing as quickly as people would like it to, why people aren't waking up quickly, because even people who like are supposedly awake, right? Like they know about the chemtrails, they know about 9/11, they know about the Clintons and the pedophilia and the Pizzagate, and they have no idea how it's working, how it's really working. Like they have, you know, they know the conspiracies about who it is and why it is and whatever, but they don't actually understand the mechanics or the metaphysics of how it works. And so they can very easily be herded off into one pen with some idea about like, oh, adrenochrome. And I'm not saying that there's nothing to the adrenochrome story, there is, but let's just say these people are efficient and they're not just looking for one part of the body, they use it all. And so if they had everybody just thinking it's adrenochrome and not understanding that no, there's like other simple parts of the body, like fluids, you know, like cerebral cortex fluid, like semen, blood, other elements of the blood that are being used in ways that you wouldn't imagine if you're just focused on adrenochrome and you're just looking for stuff that highlights that, right? So that's just one example of it, kind of thing. Like more, when you don't understand how something works, right? Like the sheep obviously have not figured out how the herding works because they're still being herded, right? So at a certain point, they may realize that they are being herded, but because they haven't done any investigation of the mechanics of like moving the fence in a certain way and then moving the fence, right? That's why they keep, you know, they're moving it different this time. So it must not be the same, but it's the same, right? So it's just like, you know, we need to understand how something works before we pass judgment on it, right? And even if you have a judgment, right? Like if you haven't explored how it works, you're not actually qualified to say for sure whether that thing is bad or good.
I told you when I was back in like 2015, I was at my normal dance class and the teacher made this announcement about this big Black Lives Matter meeting. And it was, you know, this is when it was like more new. And everything in my body was like, there's something really bad here. Like there was so much contraction. And I thought, well, then I obviously need to go to investigate what that is. And I had to be there in person to hear them say, look at every white person in this crowd. They're your enemy. Do not trust them. And I was like, whoa, this is bad. But I had to go to see what it was about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, and I think it's okay. There's nothing wrong to mention the fact that someone is Jewish if you are doing an intel dump on somebody. If you're being like, they did this, they were here on this date, they went to school here, they did this, you can say that they're Jewish as one of those things. You can say that, but because they're Jewish,
oh, you should meet my friend, he's Jewish. Like, I feel like there's a line of like, I have a Jewish friend, or I have a gay friend, or I have a black friend. There's a line of like, is this relevant, or are you virtue signaling? Or are you giving us a warning? Or are you trying to destroy this person's reputation?
But no,
how is it relevant?
so I'm going to tell you right now, but sometimes when you're doing deep research and an intel dump on somebody, right, you put out all the factors about them to see what things connect. So it's okay if you're saying, I did research on so-and-so, and these are 100 things I learned about them. And you can say as one of them that it's Jewish, but that someone is Jewish in almost every circumstance is not the reason for why they're doing what they're doing, unless it's circumcision, bat mitzvahing, or following a kosher diet. Right? There's something else going on.
Right.
Yeah. And there's people who do all of those things that aren't Jewish. So there you go. So I think it's that. Like, I think that, like, you know, when you're researching someone, we often hear, oh, this person comes from Italian descent. Their family was related to so-and-so. So if you're saying that, you can say, oh, this person is a Jewish descent. But unless you actually have proof that the reason why something is happening is either solely or mostly because this person is Jewish, that does not become a reason to say that somebody is bad, right? I think we have to be much more careful about that. And other things too. I'm sure that there's probably some way I do something like that. And, you know,
I'm curious to know, like, if anyone in our audience knows something that I don't know here because of how ubiquitous this narrative is in the alternative media community. Like, you know something that I don't know about some secret evil Jew club.
So I think there's some people who are deep researchers who at some of the deepest levels of, like, Freemasonry and secret societies, what they're dealing with is Kabbalah, right? And so, but you don't people say, oh, the problem is this person is a Kabbalist. You see them say, oh, this person is Jewish. Most people who are Jewish don't know shit about the Kabbalah or any of the stuff, the mysticism associated with that and whatever. So I think that there are people who are very learned researchers on the inside scoop of the like esoteric and occult aspects of some of the things we're talking about that would say, yes, the secret societies are practicing in a lot of ways Kabbalism, right? But that isn't, most people who are saying, oh, this person's a Jew, they don't know squat about that shit. So that's not a good one. So I think it's, but I'll say this, like, I experienced this when I was a kid, like before I knew about any alternative media, right? Like, I had a babysitter who lived across the street who used to call our next door neighbor Guy Jew, right? Now, Guy was Chinese, and I think Guy probably was an intelligence agent that lived next door to monitor me in some ways, right? And I didn't figure that out until just a few years ago, based on basically catching him surveilling my garbage can, you know, and realizing the timing with which he came and went over my life and whatnot. He used to also do this weird thing where he would walk around the neighborhood on the backyard fences because we had the cement brick walls, so he could literally walk the entire neighborhood like a balance beam routine. And he would do that while he was drinking a beer, and people said, oh, fucking guy's weird, he's drinking a beer. But now he was probably monitoring all the kids in the neighborhood who were in projects, because there was probably a few, whatever it is. But it's not the point. She called, so I had this babysitter I loved, who knew I was Jewish, right, and loved me. It obviously wasn't a problem for her that I was Jewish, but she called him Guy Jew, right? And I can't say for sure why she did, because I was like 6. So I don't know that I fully understand, but the things that I get that are true about Guy that are stereotypes about Jewish people was that he was nosy and that he was cheap, right? And so that's the only thing in my head now I can see it, right? But it's such an accepted thing to say something like that she didn't even worry about saying it in front of another Jewish person. And she was just a teenager. She was just a teenager. Yeah.
Well, that is the one thing is, like, even today, with all the crazy shit we have going on, it's still completely socially acceptable to be anti-Semitic. And that has been my experience my whole life, was like, I've had people say that shit in front of me, and it doesn't even raise an eyebrow that, like, that's not a cool thing to say.
But if somebody said that kind of thing about a black person or a Muslim person or a gay person, it'd be the end of the fucking world. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. No. So yes, I think it's good, fair points. Yeah. So I think that's, are we complete on that topic? But yeah, I challenge people to not just use the Jew card as like proof of research and go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, that was my question, was it wasn't to complain about anti-Semitism. It was, I hear this so often in our community, What don't I know?
But I also think, like, the person on the show you're talking about had a million good points. Like, the fact that adding that someone was Jewish didn't actually add anything to the point or to the research.
No, it was, and for me, I had to look at the inclination to discount the relevance and the validity of everything came before and talk myself out of, like, don't do that. But this was really stupid.
Yeah, really stupid. I agree. Okay, on to the next topic. Where do I go next?
Okay, the next topic, which you wanted to talk about, so I'm curious where you want to take it, was regarding Unity 2020. And I texted you, now would be a good time for them to put their full weight behind Tulsi as an independent. And you said, yeah, if they were like legitimately trying to help us or whatever you texted back. And then I responded like, why can I not remember that? Like, why don't I remember that people have nefarious side interests and that it's all like a giant sham? And I still want to think that Brett and Heather have our best interests in mind.
Okay, so, okay, what you said, so basically, I was trying to understand what I said, because at this point, I have no love for Tulsi at all. So I think what we were going back and forth about.
And the reason I said that about Tulsi was because the Unity 2020 audience,
right, wants Tulsi.
All said we want Tulsi.
Right, okay. So, what I said here, so what you said to me is, so I have been tracking this Unity 2020 thing hard because I do see a good deal of mind control being deployed there. Like, and this weird thing that even though they've suspended their campaign and it's definitely not getting as much traction as they would like, or maybe that's part of the plan too, I don't know. They're still talking about this possible emergency that may arise. And I'm just curious, I'm curious as to what this insight that he has about.
I think it's when Biden goes to jail for Benghazi. That's going to be the
Oh, you're so cute, Dani. You're precious. You're like a little puppy.
It's that same idealism. Like, I keep thinking justice is going to happen. It's so cute.
You keep thinking it's not justice. It's just us, Dani. They're just, right? Like, that's, you know. So I that's why I kind of keep tracking it, because I'm very interested in this Delphi technique that they're using with everybody to gain consensus. I'm interested.
What is that? What is the Delphi technique?
The Delphi technique is, like, basically the point is not to reach truth or to reach the best solution. It's just to agree, like, everybody in agreement on what the solution should be, right? Okay. It's like, or like, you can even disagree, but the person who is facilitating the conversation finds something in what you said that is able to twist your words around to convince you that actually, no, you really agree with them.
Got it.
The technique is often used at, like, local, like, city council community meetings to try and, like, so when they're trying to bring in Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 or 5G or fluoride in the water or whatever, people might show up to, they'll feel like they're participating based on being able to say what they think at the meeting, but they have somebody there who's practiced in the Delphi technique, which is a very simple mind control technique of basically thesis, antithesis, synthesis application, NLP application, combined with this way of twisting disagreement into, like, you know, how, like, turning their no into a yes based on, like, getting them, come on, everybody else, you know, like, making them think that, like, we all agree about this, right? We all agree. Even if you disagree, you still have some agree, right? And because I consistently hear them talking about this building a consensus, like, rule by consensus. Like, rule by consensus is fucking totalitarian.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, it sounds like freedom, but it's not, right? So I'm piqued, that my interest is piqued just because of this is, like, they're either, like, coincidentally, like, creating the biggest tapestry of mind control bullshit ever, or, you know, just a great display and looking like you're just like, aw shucks, homie kind of people, but I fucking found a video of Brett Weinstein on a TED Talk from 7 years ago. So I've come to the decision that if a person is on a TEDx talk and we've never heard, like, if all of a sudden we start hearing of someone we've never heard of before, and then we look back and we can see that they did a TEDx talk 7 years ago, right? This is, that's where they were subsumed. They were given the opportunity, either that was like their introduction to the larger intelligence agencies that you can now start to use this person, or based on their performance, they were plucked, something like that. It's a platform for, like, deciding which way we're gonna go with this person, right? They're a useful idiot or they're not, right? Or whatever it is, okay? So I'm interested on tracking what this emergency is, and on this, like, how many people can they draft into this idea that rule by consensus is a good idea. And it's scary to me, some of the people. Now, I like the pushback they get from some people. Like, I like that Jesse Ventura and Justin Amash and whatever push back a little bit. But I don't like how kind of easily someone like Matt Taibbi, who I greatly respect, seems to kind of fold into some of this. Now, some of it is based on, like, part of the way you get somebody to come into this with you is, like, in a much lower scale. Matt Taibbi has received the same rejection from his community that Brett Weinstein did at Evergreen, right? Because you're telling the truth, but it doesn't go along with the overall narrative, and so you are bad. And so suddenly, then, if there's other people that have had that experience, now you're in a club together, right? So that probably explains some of it and whatnot. So I'm just tracking that. But it's not interesting enough for me to have continued tracking it very much over the course of my trip to Texas. But I did tune back into Brett the other day for just 10 minutes, and I watched him, like, very elegantly move over the course of 10 minutes from a discussion that would be appealing to any person like you or I about the wonders of experiencing synesthesia when on psychedelic mushrooms, into an analysis of the political compass chart that basically you don't realize he's saying this, but he's trying to convince people that all politicians are actually right-wing authoritarians, right? Kind of thing. Like, he's saying that, like, left-wing authoritarianism exists, but not amongst politicians. It's fucking, I was like, wow, this is fucking crafty and clever. Now, I didn't keep listening, so maybe later in it, something is right, something else happens and there's an explanation of it. He acknowledges that the people on the ground are left-wing authoritarian, right? But he has Bernie Sanders as being a left-wing libertarian, right? He has, right, like, he had kind of thing. He has Tulsi Gabbard as being a left-wing libertarian. Which also even
he's very confused. He's doing with libertarian the same thing that he's doing with patriotism, and he's conflating it with socialism. And I don't know if his audience is so stupid that they're buying it.
Yeah. Yeah, like right. So it's this everything. If you look at how many times he uses the word reimagining, imagining, or evolutionary, which implies that everything is changeable. Which obviously that's a fundamental truth about our reality, is that most things are on some level changeable, right? But the way he's doing it, he's actually totally redefining it. He's not, like, removing 1 degree of truth from what patriotism is, but leaving the other 9. He's, like, removing 9 and leaving 1. Yeah. And same with the idea of libertarian and the idea of authoritarian. And, like, I'm 100% sure that, like, he doesn't find these mass lockdowns and shit like that authoritarian.
He
right?
loves them. He's
them.
for them. Remember, he was lobbying for no one leaves the house, and he's wearing his stupid fucking little muzzle with his wife.
Yeah. So, right. So, like, he obviously doesn't understand authoritarianism.
No.
Right. So,
well, I think he understands it, but he's trying to pull one over. That's his whole writ, and he's clearly taking NLP classes.
Oh, yeah.
See it? Yeah. So it's all a big sham.
When I say he clearly doesn't understand authoritarianism, no, I agree with you. I believe he does understand it, but he presents as like, oh shucks, authoritarianism is only when the students come and yell at the teacher and call them a racist. It's not when we have a 6-week hard lockdown where no one can leave their house. Like, so. Right. It's that there's, now, like, Heather's more interesting because, like, she does sometimes, like, pull him back a few hairs towards, like, reality, right? Mm-hmm. But then she also ultimately, like, swims over into the bullshit. So it feels like she's almost there to, convince the naysayers, right? To sort of, like, do a little defense of this point that you and I might have or whatever, right? And she does it and she stands her ground on that. But later he says something equally as stupid and she disagrees, right? And so then people are used to, well, we can trust Heather, so let's go swim over here into the pool, the kitty, that kind of thing.
Well, and I also think it gives him, like, vag legitimacy. you know, like everyone, you know, because of this, the whole sexism card. So the fact that there's a woman there and there's a woman saying these things, like it quells some of the, like, it's only white men who are making all the decisions, who are in the IDW or who are whatever.
Yeah. So that, and then as to your point with Tulsi Gabbard, so I'm going to remove my disappointment in Tulsi Gabbard.
And I just want to be clear. I'm with you. I have the same disappointment.
Disappointed in Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm disappointed in Tulsi Gabbard, but I'm more disappointed in myself for allowing myself to like her for about 7 minutes. You know what I mean? Like,
really?
yeah.
I don't feel like she was a sham. I just feel like she's weak.
I don't know. I'd say that, like, and I'd say maybe she's under mind control on a certain level. You know, like I don't know. She has some qualities about her that signify mind control to me. But she's in
the military. Just think about what mind imagine they have total control over their diet.
I've always disagreed with her on a lot of foreign policy issues, because even though she was anti-intervention in Syria and Libya, she fully believes in the official story on 9/11, on the crap about Al-Qaeda and all that kind of crap. So there's always been questions about her, but there was something very likable about her to me, and also she's easy on the eyes and all that kind of stuff. So it's very easy to be sort of taken in by, like, the strong, powerful woman who isn't afraid to stand up to Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris and all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, no, I'm disappointed myself for liking a lot of people. The only two politicians I don't have any regrets about having liked them are Cynthia McKinney and Dennis Kucinich. They are the only two that have never, even though I disagree with each of them on some things, they have never behaved in a way that makes me go, okay, I feel stupid for having liked this person. Everyone else I did. So I have more disappointed in myself than I'm just Tulsi Gabbard, but for the point of the conversation, right? Like, I
think it's endearing that you let yourself be into her for a moment. Like, it indicates your humanity and a softness, and while you're disappointed in that, like, I think it's adorable. I love it.
I'm adorable. Okay, so a couple of things here. So, like, it's a stupid idea anyway, because she's already said she's not going to run the third party. She's been very clear. She's not a liar. I'll give that to her. She is not a liar.
I think that's one of her biggest problems is her adherence to her own egoic integrity, which is why she, what is it called when she advocated for Joe Biden or gave her
rolling over.
She rolled over. Like, for me, that was when she lost me. It was like, I know you said you would back the Democratic candidate, but once we found out that it was this murderer with dementia, you might want to give yourself the ability to change your mind. But she has this kind of old school, I keep my word thing that, for me, I see that as getting in her way.
Okay, so it does get in her way, but it's also the one thing that one can continue to respect about her is I can't find instances of her lying, of her not keeping her word, which does still separate her from most politicians, totally. Right? Which is why it's harder to speak critically of her than it is some of the others. However, there's a couple of things. She did, from the very beginning, say she'll support whoever the other candidate is. And all of them are bad choices who are just as murderous. They might not be as demented as Joe Biden, but they have some other quality that's just as bad as his dementia.
Yep.
So that was a problem. I think there was a way she could, but I do respect her saying that, no, I'm not going to take funding from the Democratic Party on a certain level and then later go switch up and run as a thing. Now, I don't think you have to do that to be a good person, but that's what she chose to do. And I think that's worth maintaining your word over. But there was a way to handle it, right? There was a way to say, I'm dropping out. There's no path to victory for me. I'm going to keep my word and not run as a third party. I did say that I would back the eventual nominee, but in this case, this is a person I feel is unfit for office. And so I'm not going to back somebody else, but I can't back him because he's not.
If she did that, I would have a trillion times more respect for her.
I still would have some issues with her, but the big problem to me is that because she ended up supporting someone who doesn't have one thing in common with what she states her positions are. And she did this weak thing where she just like made an excuse, like, oh, I served with the son and I know the family and blah, 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 right, kind of thing. But so
I also don't respect these candidates' allegiance to the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party treats them like shit and is so criminal. That's a problem for me.
Okay, so I'm going to go off further into the weeds here, and I'm not predicting that any of these things are happening. I'm not in the business of predictions. I say a lot of crap. Most of them don't come true. Sometimes they do. The weirdest ones come true. Like I haven't even talked about this one. Like so for 2 years privately, I've been talking about my suspicions about shit, about poop, right? And about a month ago, I went public on Conspiracy Cocktail with it. I talked a little bit about it on the show with Victor, and then at Robert's conference, I talked about it, not on the air, but at the conference in general. And then I'll explain it to you sometime. But just this week, there has been information coming out from MIT and in the news that they're looking to employ smart sewers that will analyze people's shit. So unfortunately, Conspiracy Cocktail isn't recorded, so you can't hear my whole sermon on our shit. But so I'm the sugar shit girl because I seem to manage to get high-end universities to confirm my the two wackiest things, like saying that like sugar is programmable matter, or that literally like they're surveilling you and reading your mind based on your feces, are pretty far out there things. Those are the two that I've gotten confirmed. A lot of my political predictions are not there. So I'm not saying I am no prophet or oracle or whatever. Like I connect the dots on a million different ways, and even a broken clock is right twice a day, and so far I've gotten 2 good ones right? Okay, but I'm just going to play the game anyway and go out here. So it's a dead on arrival idea in one way, because she said from the very beginning, I am not running as a third-party candidate, and I will support the Democratic nominee. So the fact that they even include her in their possibilities would seem to be stupid. It doesn't make any sense, right? So that seems like it would be a dead idea. Right, and to your point, like, why don't they just throw all their state? Why try and do it as Unity 2020? Blah blah blah. Why not just? You would say, why don't they just get behind her as an independent run? She won't run as an independent, right? And so it doesn't make any sense why they've been doing this. They built up a lot of stuff around Tulsi Gabbard and Dan Crenshaw, both of who, in my opinion, are very conflicted and controversial individuals who also seem to have crossover appeal. Right? People from both parties seem to like them, and they have won the hearts and minds of even people who oppose them in the way they've handled certain controversies publicly. So even people who don't like Tulsi Gabbard did like the way she manhandled Kamala Harris, and even people who don't like Dan Crenshaw are impressed with the way he handled being made fun of by Saturday Night Live. He did it with class and grace and all that kind of stuff. So they put a lot of effort into like bringing the possibility of these two together as a ticket, blah, blah, blah. They tried with the Andrew Yang, McCraven thing, but this was it. But why with this? She's already said no. Like, why do you keep, it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense unless you know that there's going to be an emergency. And let's say, like, she just said she'd back Joe Biden in this election. If this election happens and then post the election something happens that changes something, and suddenly we're into a whole new paradigm that has a different political system, and people are scrambling for a leader because people are afraid to be not led for a few minutes, well, then that's not part of the other thing, and she's free to do that. So I do think, like, and I'm not even saying that there is collusion between Brett Weinstein or his Unity stuff and Tulsi Gabbard. What I'm saying is, like, and this is where the possibility that she is potentially mind controlled comes in, right? Because Brett Weinstein is doing a lot of things that I would call perpetration of mind control on a certain percentage of the population. And I believe he to be under a certain level of mind control, which always there are very few people that know about all the moving parts. Everybody who's mind controlling someone is also under mind control on a certain level.
Keep in mind they're from where we're from. And we're all the same generation.
We're all from the same crap, right? Yeah. So, you know, so I was completely ready to let my theory on the Unity 2020 party go until I got a Patreon message from a patron the other day. So in the last show I did with Michael before I went away on my trip to Texas, we were talking about a number of things. We talked about Catherine Austin Fitts, but the other thing we talked about, he was not aware of what Unity 2020 was. And he was also not aware of the intellectual dark web or any of that kind of stuff. He's a geomancer. He's into like looking at the mounds and the forts and the, you know, whatever, right? And he follows certain threads of like social stuff like that, but not other stuff. He's not like a, you know, he doesn't look at the same stuff that we always look at. So I was explaining to him what unity was, what the IDW was, and blah, 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 right? And I got a response from a patron about that show that said here, just wanted to let you know that the Project Kids 8 super resonated with me. Great stuff. I actually had the chance to meet Catherine Austin Fitz in Portland, Oregon, which was an interesting experience to say the least. I also had a really weird experience a couple of weeks ago, having a random phone call from someone I hadn't heard from since college, insisting that I need to look into the intellectual dark web and the Weinstein brothers, as he is a huge fan of their work, right? Like this guy isn't, but his friend was. So somebody, and there's more, but that's the part that was important. So somebody is so moved by these ideas that Brett and Eric and this whole group of people are putting forward, that they felt the need to call someone that they hadn't talked to in 20 years and implore, right? So there is something going on here, right? Like I remember, like even my dad, who most of his friends are fucking old and asleep and whatever, like about 10 years ago, he had a friend who I knew when I was little also, who also was very, very left, right? But he had found that website Truth Dig that what's his name? Chris Hedges and stuff used to write for a lot. And he had implored to my dad that he needed to start looking at this. And my dad blew that off too, right? But there was something that he had found there that felt like he needed to reach out to my dad, who he hadn't talked to in so long, and start telling him to look at that.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like that. So there is something happening here where like people who, you know, like there's something, even if it's small, right? Like all of the big, huge shifts that happen in socio-political life and culture start with only a few % of the people like being aware and involved in what they are. Right?
Well, you called this, you know, a couple months ago, that they're presenting themselves as like this alternative, and they have this hipster street cred. And now that it seems like more and more people are starting to figure out that left and right are the same thing, they're going to mistakenly buy into the notion that they're an alternative and that they're a solution.
Right.
And you see the people who are associated, Daniel Schmachtenberger and the Rebel Wisdom, and it's like, you just see these people, and it's very quiet. It's happening slowly, quietly, gradually.
So like slowly, quietly, gradually. And also, I think even some of these things around Unity 2020, like they didn't build this movement as quickly and as big as they wanted to. I think some of this notion is performative as well, right? It just wasn't popular. So this isn't a popular thing. This is very fringe, right? Mm-hmm. Like these ideas, like this whole thing with like the nonsense that was made about Twitter banning Unity 2020. Like they're trying to convince people that this is much more fringe and much more controversial than it really is. I'd say the same thing about Joe Rogan and the Spotify thing. This whole nonsense, this brouhaha about the people at Spotify, they want the ability to edit it, and all this controversy that's being created about the non-uploaded episodes are to make it seem to the mainstream people that Joe Rogan is very controversial, right? He is so far out in left field that anything further than that certainly can't be considered, because this is already pushing it. That's the whole point of this. And so I think it's this idea of moving the Overton window as to what is considered fringe and making something that actually isn't very fringe seem like it's very fringe, but also starting to pull as many people as they can into this idea that rule by consensus is a good idea, that we all have to agree about everything all the time for the greater good. And so, you know, whatever it is, whether it's going to be a factor soon or later, like this is not healthy. This is not healthy to be redefining words in sneaky ways, to be pushing people towards consensus rather than having a good debate and agreeing to disagree. And maybe if someone makes a really good point, they'll actually change their mind, but not the point to be, the point should be finding the truth, not consensus on like a middle path that is neither true nor false, but just like some wonky, weird, like, you know, unfinished sex change operation. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? I don't mean that in any offensive way, but it's like, you don't have somebody who's like, I want to transition from a male to a female, but like, you know, if you can just take me halfway there, I'm okay with that. It's like weird, right? Like it's bizarre, right? Like to get people, if we're going for truth, then like, something that doesn't work for either side should be agreeable to both people. It just doesn't make any sense.
It really does not make any sense. It'll be interesting to watch it continue to unfold because it is performative. It is theater. There is a larger end game that they're onto. They are being controlled by a lot of the same players who are controlling the other players that we're witnessing. So it'll be interesting to see how it converges.
And everything is quiet until it's not. Like, I didn't hear about George Soros until I heard about him. Right? And so a lot of people who haven't heard about Unity 2020, right, they're going to hear about it in 5 years or 10 years or whatever, right? And they're just going to think that this is this new phenomenon because they haven't watched how it's been. We didn't watch what George Soros was doing with his money as he collected it.
Well, it's also really interesting that their edge and their street cred comes from the thing that happened at Evergreen and their current stance on this race war. But it seems like Eric's being controlled by Soros, who's the one who's funding the race war and engineering the race war, which makes me think that they're kind of in that, but they have this, they're going to constantly point to like, well, the thing that happened in Evergreen and what they happen to be saying right now at race as the thing that makes them edgy and progressive and not part of the thing that they're totally part of.
George Soros doesn't ultimately care about, like, he doesn't care about the race war, right? He wants
to divide us. He just wants to divide. That's it.
He's after the end of synthesis, right? So there has to be a race war so that both sides can go, neither one of us are ever going to get what we want. Let's just all agree to do what George Soros wants, because that seems to be somewhere in the, I mean, it's so stupid, right? Like, but you know, like, that's what this is like, you pull everything apart, right? So that then you can kind of slam it back together, right?
Well, there was also this, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, there's this video that Mickey mentioned in the interview that I did with him last week, and I'll look it up and I'll put the link in, but it's from like 1958, 68, talking about the communist takeover that was happening and how they were going to use the race war and these racial tensions as the huge design piece to make it happen.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think it's so interesting how we have Soros who's engineering that piece, and then we have Brett and Heather who seem to be the voice of reason that are opposing it when they're all just doing the same thing.
And it's entirely possible that Heather and Brett are under a certain level of mind control so that they may think that they're doing what they want to be doing, right? That's the whole thing, is like, until you can acknowledge and understand that there is mind control at work and that you are under it, you have no ability to break away from it. And that's why, like, Joe Rogan's biggest problem is he's aware that mind control exists, but he refuses to accept that it possibly could have worked on him at some point in his life, or maybe even now. That's his biggest problem. Right? So, like, I'm no smarter. I'm not saying I'm smarter or a better person or anything than Joe Rogan. I just recognize that there's mind control in the world and it's been used on me and it has worked. Right? And so when you have that tool, like, when you realize you can be mind controlled, as you're untangling things, you're also looking for the angles that you could be missing based on being mind controlled. Or
so
like,
do you still think that Joe Rogan still thinks that he's not controlled?
I think he thinks I think he's coming into the awareness that there are people that would like to control him, but he doesn't think he's being controlled.
Okay. He's
coming into that awareness that there's obviously factions vying for how his fame will be used to drive a narrative. I think if he isn't aware of that by this point, then he's dumber than a fucking box of rocks. And I don't think he's dumber than, but I do think he wholeheartedly believes that he would know it if he was being mind controlled, which is the point of mind control, is to have you not know it. So that doesn't make any sense, right? And I completely, like, even in, like, when a wonderful opportunity comes up for me, like, I'm always a little bit, like, this could lead to a situation where I'm, like, smoking my own dope, or, you know, like, getting hot, just believing my own bullshit, or, like, somebody is stroking my ego in a way that, like, is part of a deep-seated part of my mind control or whatever. And so I always consider those things. And still, I probably still make a decision from a place of being partially mind controlled sometimes, right? So it's like, I know 100% that we all have the ability to have our minds controlled, even if it's just by loving someone who's manipulative. right? Yeah. It's still mind control, right? So, you know, so yeah, so I think that's kind of like all I really have to say on that is that, you know, this is George Soros, like didn't happen, and the way he like movements like the ones that he funds didn't happen overnight. Like we became aware of Black Lives Matter at a certain point, but those programs were under development for years, maybe even decades before they came to prominence, right? Like none of this stuff, it was just like overnight. Lots of things that we think were overnight phenomenons were years in the making. Like even with athletics, right? When like, I remember the first time I ever saw Simone Biles, it was like she came out of nowhere. It was because I hadn't been paying close attention to gymnastics. And you could go back and find her coming up to the ranks and no, there was no media buzz. And in 1 year, she did go from being like super sloppy, but with big tricks to super clean. So that was the reason why all of a sudden she became popular and famous, but it was worked on for a long time. There is no like overnight phenomena. There's no just like one day Greta Thunberg's famous. Like there's none of that. Like that just doesn't really happen in this reality. Okay, so then the other thing, and we're gonna do one more thing and then we'll go to the afterwards portion because we're gonna start including that more often. I like that. You had this thing about like you were being accused of being anti.
Yeah, we don't have to spend too much time in it, but I'm noticing the strategy that the left is leaning on right now is if I vote for Trump, then that is an act of violence against gay people, and I am homophobic. Or if I vote for Trump, then that is an act of violence against women, and therefore I am a misogynist. And it's taking the whole SJW narcissistic, everything that everyone does in the world has to do with me, right? Like that's how I see the SJW thing. It's like very self-centric. Everything, if I make an insensitive tweet on Twitter, that is a direct attack on someone else instead of me just being careless or reckless. And I'm watching this being wielded, and I feel like they sent out a script because it was the same day that my dance teacher posted something saying, if you love an LGBTQ person and you vote for Trump, that is an act of violence against them. And they crossed out them and replaced it with me. And I was like, no, an act of violence is if I like punch an LGBTQ person and say, I'm punching you because you're gay. That would be an act of violence. But me voting for someone who you don't like I can't follow that crazy mental gymnastics and hop on board that. But the same day that he posted it, Zoe Kravitz posted it, and I saw a couple other sort of like influencer celebrities posting these like false equivalences of if A, then, you know, Q 99% and gravity. You know, like they were just these things that made no sense of trying to tie together. They were trying to do
post hoc ergo propter hoc symbolic logic with things that don't qualify to be used in that. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. So there's not really much to say except that like this is an absurd thing that they're doing, this like very extreme sort of ideological manipulation and bullying that I find crazy and offensive. And when I see it, and truth be told, at this point, I don't feel like voting because it feels so toxic that I don't even want to go there. But when I see a meme like that, I'm like, now I want to go vote for Trump 50 times because you're saying something so stupid.
Okay, hold that thought for a second because something just keeps happening that I need to give voice to here. So I'm going to respond to your thought. So my dad just texted me, the Dodgers just scored 11 runs in the first inning, new postseason record, right? So when I talked to my dad earlier today.
So football's happening right now?
I love that you think Dodgers are football. I love you, right? So earlier it's the playoff.
This is the like New Orleans Dodger football team?
Yeah. No. So earlier I was talking to my dad because, you know, the Dodgers are in the playoffs, and I was like, yeah, I haven't been watching baseball this year at all. Like something you and my dad used to do together. I haven't had time. So the other day, for the first time, I had a few minutes. I put on the first game of the playoffs, and in the first hit of the game, the Dodgers gave up a run. I'm like, Dodgers suck. I'm out, right? Like I'm done, right? And so me and my dad were talking about it. But like you and I are sitting here. This is why the reality will continue as it is, right? You and I are sitting here having these conversations, and my dad is texting. Like this is important to him, right? But like you know, if I send him,
He wants to bond with his daughter.
right, but I've been trying to bond with him over 6 months, like 3 months now, by like asking him to please watch The Plandemic so we can have a conversation about it. And I'm okay if you disagree with me, but I want to have a conversation because maybe you don't know these things, right? And but he definitely will call me to talk about the Dodgers 11 runs later, right? And so as long as the world is burning on a certain level, on another level, everything is just fine. But on a certain level, the world is burning. As long as people are like, yes, but the Dodgers scored 11 runs, then we're fucked. We are fucked. So okay. So like what you said. So my only response. So I thought it was interesting what your response is. You said, I don't really feel like voting because it's toxic. I was like, yes, go. Now you're getting it, right? And then you said, but I want to because like these people are making me just want to.
No, I mean, it's not, I'm not legitimately taking that and saying I'm going to go vote. Like, I'm not that impressionable, but I'm just noticing like that it's just so stupid. And how, you know, Sally and I were talking about that. The ridiculousness of the hysteria around the SJWs creates this like, well, I want to do what you don't want me to do because I'm tired of you trying to bully me.
It has this effect of like turning us all into 6-year-old brats that says like, anything you do, I'll do the opposite, right? Like that kind of thing, right? Like just to be annoying. Like, and the left makes it so easy to want to do that, like that, right?
That's it.
So part of it, this evolution and this reimagining of ourselves as a sophisticated, mature group of beings here is that we shouldn't give into that, right? But the other thing is my thing, there's actually one appropriate thing to come back at them with is that like, well, then truthfully, according to their rationale, and also this actually happens to be true, you know, if you really understand the way government works, voting itself is violence. Voting is saying that like I want to impose what I think is right on you.
Well, I mean, then government itself is, I mean, if we're going to play the tit for tat, I'm just
got it.
Game,
but now you've got it.
Voting Democrat means you're voting for censorship, means you're hurting me as a journalist. Like, we can all play the stupid game.
Right. But the whole thing is like, so in order to not be doing violence against you because you're gay, you have to vote for somebody who has dementia and has done all these really super corrupt things, which will definitely result in like people who shouldn't be bombed being bombed, people who, right, all that kind of stuff. Like, what about the violence against them?
I mean, not to mention that Trump is the only president who's ever supported gay marriage and has an openly gay like, I'm not going there with it because I'm not going to take the bait and get sucked in. Right. But like, it's retarded on too many levels to catalog.
Well, right. So the whole thing is dumb. You can't find a single president in all the history of the United States that hasn't said something that's homophobic at some point. They've all said it. So just voting is violence then. Voting is violence, period. Right? Like, there's no candidate.
Right. Like, was it violence against gay people to vote for Hillary, who was very open about being against gay marriage?
Right. So according to their own logic, voting itself is violence.
Right.
You can't, there's no one you can vote for that it wouldn't be violence because they've all made those homophobic statements. Right? So it's just dumb on arrival. But everything is right now. So it's just dumb and dumb. We're just dealing with dumb and dumber. That's it.
Well, the through line that I'm seeing also, I just noticed this as far as what you were talking about, Brett, with his like redefining and this is libertarian and this is like, the whole left has taken upon themselves to redefine every word to mean whatever they want it to mean.
So violence is you voting for Trump, but it's not violence if Antifa hits somebody over the head with a bike lock.
Or shoots them in the head. That's not violence.
Not violence, right?
Yeah.
Because that's in defense, that's fighting fascism. When I was driving home, I had to take Olivia to the vet. Driving home, I saw a billboard that was talking about how racism is a public health issue, right? It's the same kind of thing, right? So it's just like...
Yeah, Sally has a client who's a victim of environmental racism.
I know,
What the fuck is that? I don't know what that even is.
Right, I remember when she sent me that thing and I was just like, oh God, right? Like if you live on a block that has a gas station on it and you're not white, right? And if you're white, you're not the victim of environmental racism. But if you are a person of color or gay or transgender or disabled and you live on the block that has a gas station on it, you're a victim of environmental racism. It's pretty much something like that.
Can we just secede to some little landmass of awake, sane grown-ups, self-responsible grown-ups? Because the culture's just gone so crazy. I really don't know how to relate.
Yeah, it's cuckoo. All right, I think that's gonna wrap it up. Then for me, it's like, I don't know. It's like in some ways, like acting to secede acknowledges the fact that the state has some power anyway. So I don't know if that's the right tag. It's a fucking damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. We're gonna move over into the afterward segment. You can join us at either of our Patreons, Danny Katz or Off Planet Media, to get the second part of the show. And we will see you over there. Anything else?
You look great in pink.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see you next time, guys.